This story is not for the faint of heart. Fear is a part of you. There's no turning back. The nightmare has begun. It's supposed to be a fresh start, a new house, a new town. You had always wanted a quiet life away from the city noise, and this small old house in the suburbs seemed perfect for that. The moment you stepped inside, you felt something odd in the air, an unease that you couldn't quite place, but you brushed it off, thinking it was just the unfamiliarity of the place. The house was a classic two-story structure with weathered brick walls, dark wooden floors, and narrow windows that let in little light. The previous owner had kept it in decent shape, but it still felt like it had seen better days. Maybe it was the peeling wallpaper in the hall or the strange creak of the floors when you walked, but something felt off. That first night, you couldn't sleep. Every time you closed your eyes, you heard soft whispers, distant and muffled, but unmistakable. You thought it was just the wind, or perhaps the house settling, but it didn't feel like that. The whispers were deliberate, almost as if they were calling you, beckoning you to listen. You tried to ignore it, but as the night wore on, the whispers grew louder. And then you heard something more distinct, a faint knocking sound from upstairs. Your heart raced as you slowly got out of bed, questioning whether you had imagined it. But no, the knocking continued, each tap growing louder and more insistent. You climbed the stairs cautiously, your breath shallow, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. When you reached the top, the knocking stopped. You stood in the hallway, the floorboards creaking under your weight. A chill ran down your spine. You knew something wasn't right, but you couldn't put your finger on it. As you turned to walk back, something strange caught your eye. One of the doors, your bedroom door, was wide open. You hadn't left it open. You were sure of it, but you didn't dare investigate. The air in the house seemed to shift, growing colder, heavier. There was a presence now, something that wasn't supposed to be there, something that you couldn't see, but you could feel it, watching you, waiting. You quickly closed the door and locked it, trying to convince yourself that it was just your imagination. But the strange occurrences didn't stop. The knocking didn't stop. Every night, it got worse. The whispers became clearer, the knocking louder. And soon, you realized you are not alone in that house. There was something or someone else in that house with you, and it was trying to make its presence known. The days blurred together as you tried to get accustomed to the odd occurrences. You convinced yourself that it was just the house settling, the creaks of an old building, or perhaps your mind playing tricks on you after a long day of moving in. But deep down, you knew it wasn't just your imagination. Something in the house was alive in a way you couldn't understand. The whispers, now a constant presence, followed you everywhere you went. During the day, they were faint, almost imperceptible, like a soft breeze brushing against your ear. But at night they became louder, more insistent. Sometimes, they even felt like they were right behind you, their breath cold against your neck. You tried to drown them out with music, with the TV, but nothing worked. Then came the room. It was a small, unremarkable door at the end of the hall, tucked away in the far corner of the house. You hadn't noticed it before, but one evening, after another restless night of listening to the whispers, You found yourself standing in front of it. The door was old, the wood darkened with age, and the doorknob was covered in dust, as though it hadn't been touched in years. You reached for the knob, hesitant but driven by an overwhelming curiosity. As your hand closed around the cold metal, you felt a sudden chill in the air, so sharp that it made you shiver. The door creaked open slowly, as though it had been waiting for you to do so. Inside, the room was pitch dark. It was strange because you could see the dim light from the hallway spilling through the crack in the door, but it didn't penetrate the room. It was as if the darkness inside was thick, almost alive. You couldn't see anything. No furniture, no windows, just an impenetrable blackness. You took a step forward, the floorboards groaning under your weight, but the moment your foot crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind you, trapping you inside. Your heart skipped a beat, and you spun around, trying to yank the door open. It didn't budge. Panic surged through you, but you forced yourself to stay calm. You took a breath, and then you noticed something that made your blood run cold. The whispers. They were louder now, more distinct, almost like a chant. It's here. It's waiting. The room seemed to grow colder with each passing second, the whispers growing into frantic mutterings. You felt a presence moving around you, just out of reach. You couldn't see anything, but you could feel it. Something was circling you in the dark. Suddenly, you heard a sharp, dry cough behind you. You froze, dread seeping into your bones. You wanted to scream, but your voice caught in your throat. You felt the cold breath against your neck, so close that it almost made you gag. You shouldn't have come here. The voice was unmistakable. It was deep, guttural, like it came from the very bowels of the earth. You spun around, your heart pounding, but there was nothing, only the oppressive, suffocating darkness. The door creaked open again, and before you could even think, you bolted through it, stumbling into the hallway. The light from the living room felt like a safety net, but the whispers, they followed you. They were in your ears now, sharp and relentless. You can't escape, not from this house, not from me. Your head was spinning. You didn't know whether you were imagining it or if the house had truly come alive. But one thing was certain. This place was haunted, and whatever it wasn't going to let you leave. The days passed in a haze. You couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. But every time you tried to leave, a cold, invisible hand seemed to pull you back. The whispers never stopped, and every night, the door would creak open, the darkness inside beckoning you. It was as if you were being drawn deeper into the house, into its secrets. You tried to tell yourself it was all in your head, stress from the move, too much isolation. But deep down, you knew. The house wasn't just old, it was haunted. The presence wasn't just a feeling, it was real, and it was watching you. One afternoon, you found an old newspaper in the attic, yellowed with age. The headline was barely legible, but the words murder and family stood out. The article detailed the brutal murder of a family in the very house now called home. The father, mother, and 2 children were slaughtered in their sleep. The crime never solved. The eerie part was the fact that the police found no trace of the murderer. The house had been sold shortly after, the family's belongings left behind. But no one had dared to stay for long. Every previous owner had fled after only a few months. You weren't the first to be lured in by its charm only to be driven away by the horrors within. That night, the whispers were louder than ever. You tried to sleep, but the words from the newspaper echoed in your mind. As you lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, a sudden bang echoed through the house. It came from upstairs, but it wasn't the usual knocks. This time, it was louder, more violent. You couldn't stay in your room any longer. With trembling hands, you grabbed a flashlight and slowly made your way upstairs. The air was thick, suffocating, and the silence was more unnerving than the noise had been. When you reached the top of the stairs, the whispers stopped. Everything was silent. But then you heard it. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from the hallway. You froze, your body paralyzed with fear. The footsteps were getting closer. You turned the corner, and there, standing at the end of the hall, was a figure. It was tall, shadowy, and its features were obscured by the darkness. And then, just as quickly as it appeared, the figure vanished. You ran back to your room, heart racing, trying to catch your breath. You slammed the door shut and locked it. The house was alive, and whatever it was, it had been waiting for you, waiting for someone to uncover its secrets. And now, you are too deep to escape. The following day, you tried to convince yourself it was just your imagination. But every time you closed your eyes, you saw it, the shadow, standing motionless in the hallway, staring at you with an intensity that made your skin crawl. The figure's presence seemed to linger, like a weight pressing on your chest. But now, it wasn't just the whispers or the shadows. You started noticing something else, something far worse. Every room in the house felt as though it were watching you. At first, you thought it was a trick of the light, the angles of the wall playing games with your eyes. But after a while, you were sure. There were eyes in the walls. You couldn't explain it, but every time you passed a room, you could feel them, hidden in the dark corners, watching. That night, you couldn't bear it any longer. You needed to know what was going on, to understand what you were dealing with. Armed with only a flashlight and the creeping sense of dread, you ventured into the basement, the place you had avoided since moving in. The air down there was thick, the smell of mildew and decay seeping through the cracks in the walls. You crept down the stairs, the beam of your flashlight shaking in your hand. The basement was just as you expected, cold, damp, and suffocating. But it wasn't the basement that sent a chill through your spine. It was what you found inside. In the corner of the room, hidden beneath a pile of rotting boxes, was a large wooden chest. It looked old, ancient even, covered in dust and cobwebs. But something about it called to you, as if it were waiting for you to uncover it. You approached it slowly, your heart pounding in your chest. You tried to open the chest, but the lock was rusted shut. Desperation surged through you, and with trembling hands, you forced it open. The hinges screamed in protest as the lid lifted, revealing something inside. It was a collection of photographs. Old, faded images of the family who had lived there before. The mother and father smiling in front of the house. The children playing in the yard. But then, as you flipped through the pictures, you noticed something strange in each one. In the background, barely visible, were dark figures, shadows, eyes peering out from the walls, watching. A cold sweat broke out across your skin as you realized something horrifying. The family had never been alone in this house. They had been watched. And now, so were you. Suddenly, the floorboards above you creaked loudly, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy steps coming down the stairs. You rushed to close the chest, but as you did, the flashlight flickered and died. The room was plunged into darkness. You heard it then, a whisper right in your ear. You shouldn't have looked. Your breath caught in your throat and panic surged through you. You turned to run, but something grabbed your ankle. You screamed, kicking and thrashing, but whatever had hold of you was too strong. The walls seemed to close in on you as the whispers grew louder, the words unintelligible but filled with malice. With a final, desperate cry, you managed to pull yourself free, stumbling towards the stairs. You climbed as fast as you could, but when you reached the top, you froze. Standing in front of you, at the top of the stairs, was the figure from before. Its eyes were dark holes, black as the void, and they stared straight through you. You didn't know what it wanted, but you knew one thing. If you didn't leave soon, you would become a part of this house's twisted history. You didn't sleep that night. Your mind was racing, replaying the horrors of the basement, the whispers, and the figure that now seemed to haunt every corner of your house. The footsteps in the dark, the cold breath on your neck, the eyes in the walls. They were all too real to ignore. You tried to leave to escape, but every time you approached the door, something held you back. It was as though the house had become a prison, and you, its unwilling occupant. Days passed in a blur of sleepless nights and constant dread. You started to see things out of the corner of your eye, flickers of movement in the shadows, faces reflected in windows when no one was there. You tried to convince yourself it was just stress, but deep down, you knew something far more sinister was at play. It was the mirror that broke you. It was a large, antique mirror that had been in the house when you moved in. It hung in the hallway, framed in dark wood, its surface always slightly dusty, always just out of reach of your curiosity. You had avoided it until now. One evening, as the wind howled outside, you couldn't help but stare at the mirror. The air around you felt thick, the house creaking as though it is alive, breathing with you. The reflection in the mirror was distorted, rippling, as if it was somehow separate from the real world. You moved closer, your hand reaching out towards it. As you touched the glass, a cold shock ran through your body. The room behind you in the reflection wasn't the same. The walls seemed warped, the colors darker. You stepped back, trying to pull away, but before you could, the glass seemed to twist, pulling you in. The world around you shifted violently. For a brief moment, everything turned black, and when you opened your eyes again, you weren't standing in the hallway anymore. You were somewhere else, somewhere wrong. The room was suffocatingly cold, the air thick with the stench of decay. The walls were lined with old, rotting wallpaper, and the floor was covered in dust and debris. But it wasn't the room that froze you in place. It was the reflection of yourself, standing there in the mirror, but not quite right. You moved closer to the mirror, drawn in by a force you couldn't understand. The reflection of you in the glass was distorted, its eyes empty, hollow black pits. The mouth was twisted into a grimace, a cruel mockery of your own face. And then it smiled. The reflection moved, its lips curling up into a twisted grin, and suddenly, you weren't the one in control anymore. You could feel yourself being pulled into the mirror, your body jerking as if someone else were commanding it. Panic surged through you. You turned and tried to run, but the floor beneath you gave way. You fell into the dark, into a void where time didn't exist. A cold, bone-chilling cold wrapped round you, and you couldn't breathe. Your limbs felt heavy, as though they were being weighed down by the darkness itself. You were falling, but you couldn't see the ground. You screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the void. The whispers were louder now, surrounding you, their words more urgent, more menacing. It's not too late. You're already ours. With a violent snap, you landed on the cold, hard ground. Gasping for air, you looked around, your heart pounding in your chest. You were back in the hallway, standing in front of the mirror. But this time, you were different. You could feel it. The air was heavier, charged with an energy that made your skin crawl. And there, in the reflection, was the shadowy figure again. It was no longer a distant presence. It was standing right behind you, its eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. You could feel its breath on the back of your neck, hear its whispering in your ear, a promise of something far worse than death. You shouldn't have looked in the mirror. It didn't stop. The house continued to haunt you, suffocating every waking moment. The mirror, the whispers, the eyes watching. You were no longer sure where the house ended, and you began. The boundary between reality and the twisted nightmare that had taken root in the house blurred with each passing hour. The worst part wasn't the things you saw or heard. It was the knowledge that the house had claimed others before you. You weren't the first to fall into its grasp, and you certainly wouldn't be the last. But what terrified you the most was the locked room, the one that you hadn't dared to explore until now. You had heard rumors about it from the neighbors, hushed whispers that spoke of a room at the far end of the hall, one that no one had ever entered. They said the door was sealed tight, locked from the inside. No one knew who had locked it or why. But every time you passed by, you could feel its presence, an overwhelming, suffocating feeling, like something was waiting inside. One night, after hours of restless pacing, you couldn't take it anymore. You had to know what was behind that door. The air felt heavy as you stood in front of it. The house seemed to hold its breath. You reached for the knob, and to your surprise, it turned. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but pitch blackness, a void so thick it seemed to swallow the light. You stepped forward, but a wave of nausea hit you, forcing you to hesitate. You tried to call out, but your voice was swallowed by the darkness. Inside, the room felt colder than any place you had encountered. The walls seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if the very structure of the house itself was alive, feeding off whatever was locked in here. Your flashlight flickered as you stepped inside, the beam barely cutting through the heavy shadows. The floor creaked beneath your feet, the sound amplifying in the silence. You didn't know why you felt drawn to the far corner, but there was something there, a shape, vague and formless at first, but slowly taking form as you approached. A cold wind swept through the room, and the shape seemed to solidify. It was a body, a woman. Her face was pale and gaunt, her hair long and matted. She was sitting on the floor, her eyes wide open, staring into nothing. But when you stepped closer, her eyes snapped to you. The sudden motion was enough to make you stumble back, your heart racing in your chest. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her voice hollow, echoing in the room. "You're not supposed to know. You'll never leave." Her mouth stretched into a grin, and the room seemed to tilt, the walls closing in. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the ground beneath you started to tremble. You tried to scream, but your voice was gone. The woman's grin widened, and she slowly stood up, her bones cracking with every movement. She reached for you, her hands long and claw-like, her fingers twisting unnaturally as she crawled toward you. The room was spinning now. The shadows grew more intense, consuming everything in sight. You tried to run, but your legs wouldn't move. The woman was getting closer, her face now inches from yours. Her breath was cold, stinking of death. "You'll join them soon," she murmured. "The house, it always wins." With one last desperate scream, you lunged forward, finally breaking free from the nightmare. The door slammed shut behind you, and the room returned to normal. The silence was deafening. The house was still, as if nothing had happened. But you knew it had. You knew you had seen something that you weren't supposed to. Something that wasn't meant to be seen. And now, whatever was locked in that room had your name on it. The night felt different. The air was thick with something suffocating, pressing in from all sides, making it hard to breathe. You could no longer distinguish whether the house was alive or if it was you who had lost touch with reality. The shadows had taken on a life of their own, slipping into corners, creeping along the walls, reaching out for you, always just out of reach, but always close enough to make your skin crawl. You couldn't sleep. You couldn't even close your eyes without seeing that woman, her gaunt face, her dead eyes staring into yours as if they could pierce into your soul. You kept hearing her voice, her cold whisper, "You'll never leave." And it was true. You were trapped. Every attempt to escape felt futile. The house wouldn't let you go. Every door you tried to open led to another room, another twisted nightmare, until you couldn't remember where you'd started. Every hallway, every window, every corner was an illusion, bending and warping the moment you looked away. The house itself seemed to mock your efforts to leave, its cruel game tightening its grip around you. But there was something else, something worse than the house itself, something deep inside, something you couldn't quite place. You started to notice it in the reflections. They weren't just distorting anymore. They were changing, shifting on their own. You would look in the mirror, expecting to see your own tired face staring back, but instead, you saw the shadow of someone else. The woman, the figure from the basement, or sometimes something else entirely. Sometimes there were flashes of things you didn't remember happening, things you didn't do. It's not real, you thought. It can't be real. But deep down, you knew. One night, after hours of frantic searching, your hand trembled as it reached for the basement door again. This time there was no hesitation, no turning back. The door opened, but the room beyond was different. It was darker. The walls seemed to close in on you, the air thick with the stench of mold and decay. You stepped down, but this time, you didn't feel the familiar creak of the floorboards. Instead, it was as though the house was swallowing your steps, silencing your every movement, every breath. And then you saw it, the thing you'd feared all along. The walls were covered in old, faded photographs, Faces you didn't recognize, their eyes black and vacant, their mouths twisted in silent screams. Some of them were blurred, but others, those that seemed too real, showed their own versions of the house. The same corridors, the same rooms, and the same locked door. As you walked past the photographs, something caught your eye. A reflection in the corner of the room. Your heart stopped as you turned toward it, only to see yourself standing in the doorway behind you. But it wasn't you. It was the version of you from the mirror. The dark, twisted version. The one that grinned with hollow eyes and a smile that was too wide. It stepped forward, its hand reaching out. You backed away, but the room was shrinking, the walls coming closer, the house pushing you into a corner where escape wasn't possible. "You're becoming one of them," the figure whispered, its voice low and cold. "You won't escape, not anymore." With every ounce of energy you had left, you ran. The house shifted around you, warping and contorting as you stumbled through it. The corridors twisted, the doorways disappeared, and the shadows seemed to reach out to pull you back. The figure followed. You could hear its footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing in the silent house, like a predator closing in on its prey. You reached the front door, but as you touched the handle, it was cold, colder than before. The door wouldn't budge. The house had sealed you in, trapping you once again. "You're not going anywhere," the house seemed to say. "You're part of us now." The reflection in the mirror grinned, and then everything went black. The darkness had swallowed all sense of time. You could no longer tell how long you'd been trapped in this hellish place. The house had become your prison, its walls closing in with every breath, each whisper a haunting reminder that you were never truly alone. The air was thick with decay, but beneath it, there was something far more sinister. You were no longer sure if you were running from the house or if it was you who had become part of it. The whispers had grown louder, clearer. "You belong here. You are ours now. You will never leave." You felt them seeping into your mind, their cold fingers wrapping around your thoughts, turning them dark and twisted. It was all you could hear, all you could feel. You stumbled through the house, each step becoming more labored as the oppressive atmosphere pressed down on you. And then you saw it again. The mirror, the one that had been in the center of the room when you first arrived. But this time, it wasn't the same. The reflection that stared back at you was wrong. It was a twisted, grotesque version of yourself, its features warped, its eyes empty and dark. Your breath caught in your throat as you reached out, drawn by an invisible force. The coldness of the glass sent a jolt through your spine as your fingers made contact. In an instant, the reflection stepped forward, grabbing your wrist with icy, deathly fingers. You tried to pull away, but it was too strong. It was you, but it wasn't. It was the version of you that the house had created. A twisted, broken version of your soul. You fought, but the house seemed to press in on you, the walls shifting, closing around you as you struggled. You were suffocating, both in the physical space and in your mind. The shadow in the mirror grinned, its smile too wide, its eyes too black. It was you, but it wasn't. With every ounce of strength you had left, you tore yourself away. The mirror shattered, glass falling to the floor in 1,000 jagged pieces, each reflecting your broken, distorted image. You stumbled backward, but there was no escape. The house wasn't done with you. It wasn't just a house. It was you. You had become part of it. You had fed it with your fear, your despair, and now it had claimed you. The realization hit you like a cold wave. You were trapped. You scrambled to your feet, but the room was spinning. The walls were closing in. You couldn't breathe. The house was alive, feeding on you, and there was no way out. You looked around frantically, desperate for something to break the cycle. And then you saw it. The door. The front door. It had once been locked, but now it was wide open. You ran, your heart pounding in your chest, your legs trembling beneath you. The air outside felt like salvation. For a moment, you thought you were free. The house, the shadows, the whispers, they were all behind you. But as you stepped outside, you looked back. There it was. The house. Silent. Watching. But what truly froze your blood was the figure standing in one of the windows. It was you. Your reflection, grinning. Its eyes hollow and dark. It wasn't over. The house was still with you. It would always be with you. You turned away, but the weight of it all crushed you. The truth was undeniable. You had never truly escaped. The house had taken everything from you, your soul, your sanity, and now it had taken your very essence. The house still stands, waiting for the next soul to wander too close, to feel the cold pull of the door, the lure of the shadows. It will wait forever. No one ever truly leaves.